Hey, everybody. Happy Sunday. Happy Christmas Eve. Welcome to the Brit Happens channel. Let's see who is in the Savage Patch today. First of all, Nikki, thank you for being here. Nikki is one of my amazing moderators. I'm going to give you a quick little round of applause. Glad to see you. If you do have questions, I will see them much more easily if you bust a caps lock. We may not have a ton of, even if we don't have a ton of people in the chat, if you bust a caps lock on me, I will be far more likely to see it because I am blind as a bat and I use readers. Brandy, good to see you, my love. All right. And guys, we have a very, very special guest today. We're going to be talking about something that I have a lot of passion about. It's something that affects the Karen Reed case. It is the reason behind Rich Schiffer's charges. It's the reason behind Turtleboy's charges. So today we're going to be discussing the way that Massachusetts has defecated upon the First Amendment. And we'll talk about how that affects journalism, how that affects us on YouTube, and how it affects just about everything we do in America. So without further ado, please give the warmest of welcomes to Jason Broyles. And you may know him as not HAILEY WALBRECHT.
It's true.
Jason, so glad to see you.
Thank you. It's really nice to be here. And it's true. I am not HAILEY WALBRECHT, so it makes perfect sense.
So for those of you who may not be familiar with your background story, with all that, why don't you go ahead and give a brief overview of your Twitter handle?
Sure. So back in, around this time last year, actually, I had a Twitter account that I'd had for years that I was commenting on. I'm never going to reveal it. If anyone wants to go back and figure me out, they can. But I was commenting on the Karen Reed case. Earlier, back in August of 2023, I had worked with Nick Rocco on designing the iconic billboard that everyone sees outside Patriot Place. So that was kind of my entry into the Karen Reed space. I had been following the story, had been following Turtleboy's work in terms of his, the things that he was writing. And that's what initially alerted me to it. And as I just kind of got involved in the Facebook group, one day they were talking about raising money for Karen's billboard. And there was a post about how there was a delay because the person helping them with the billboard was sick. And while I don't do it for a living, I do graphic arts and I have all of the software to do it. And I reached out to Nick Rocco privately and I said, hey, I'd be happy to help. And so I ended up by working with him to design that billboard. So I was already interested and excited about the case. On the Facebook group, I posted a meme, which I love. There's a meme of me standing underneath the billboard because I finally got there to see it in person in September of 23. And there was a meme of me standing underneath the billboard pointing up. And the text said something along the lines of, I don't get to Foxborough often, but what I do, I want to make sure my message is heard loud and clear. And no one got the joke because it was just Nick and I that knew. And I didn't tell anyone until, September or October of this year, in terms of the fact that, a couple people knew that I knew privately, but I didn't tell anyone because I never did it to get credit for it. Like wasn't, I did it because I believed in the cause and they needed help. And I wanted to help Karen in some way other than my donations to the defense fund,
Right.
But at the time, that was all I was going to do. I was going to comment on Twitter about this case, and I was going to sit back and I did help with a few other projects like the rolling video billboard. They did a design for a second billboard without a QR code. So I kind of kept in touch with Nick over that period of time.
Sure.
But I was like everyone else. I was just a spectator. And what ended up by happening is, as I was engaging with trolls on this case, just as a spectator back and forth, there was one account that was really, really good at getting their accounts canceled. And he got my long-term Twitter account permanently canceled. And then I had a second one and he got that one canceled. And then I had a third one and he got that one canceled. And I was so mad that I said, I also noticed that that troll that was doing it loved to flirt with the ladies and all kinds of things. And I said, I'm going to come back with a Twitter account with a handle that's a girl. I said,
and this troll's going to love you.
I'm going to say the exact same things that I'm going to treat him exactly the same way that I did. And I'm going to see if I get a different response. Like for me, it was completely like the scientific thing that I was going to do. I had planned on doing it for maybe a week until I called him out for being a misogynist or whatever, all of this, I had this whole plan on what I was going to do. And so I created HAILEY WALBRECHT. I actually do a lot of victim advocacy work behind the scenes. So I already had this identity on Facebook because sometimes when victims come to me with stories, I have to do my due diligence. I can't just believe everything that people come and tell me. So
right.
people who are trying in a court case to get an advantage, people who are trying to get revenge on someone because they were a jilted ex or any of these things. So I created that persona, HAILEY WALBRECHT, years earlier on Twitter, over a year before. And I mean, on Facebook. In Facebook, the very first day they challenged me and they said, you have to upload a picture of your ID if you want to use this account. So I forgot all about it, but I had bought the name and the Facebook account and some starter photos that went along with it.
Okay.
And for me, I never thought about it, but that just sat there and I tried appealing a few times, or I won't say how I did it, but I did submit an ID that was not, it was not a fake government ID, but it was not quite legit to Facebook. Try a few times to get past their theory, but it never worked. So I forgot about it. So what ended up happening is a period of time later, now that I was doing this for Twitter, I went back. I'm like, oh, I have these pictures already and I have this name. I can go and do this. I went back and I actually figured out that I successfully had ID verified on Facebook. I just had never checked again.
There are real people who still have a hard time doing that.
I was able to successfully ID verify this fake persona on Facebook, but I didn't care about that account because I was saying to myself, like, I'm doing this on Twitter now, but I was able to take the pictures and create the account and do this. One, my theory was proven correct because that account never tried to take me. I mean, he would still argue with me a little bit, but it was a combination of like arguing and flirting. Like he never tried to get my account canceled again. But the other thing that happened is before I had an opportunity to reveal the results of my experiment, the account took off. Like people started reacting to me in such a way that it was crazy. And there were women that were coming and they were saying, oh, you're so tough. Like, we love your account. We like this. And then next thing you know, I was kind of in this dilemma and I'm saying to myself, I like to help people. I already help victims and I do this. And now I have this account. What do I do with it? Like, do I end my social experiment and tell people? And I really wasn't sure what to do. And eventually, someone came to me. I had found the craziest thing, because I live in Bristol, Connecticut. I'm not in Massachusetts. I'm from Massachusetts, but I'm not there. And somebody came to me with a story about this person that was harassing women online. And I'm like, this is right up my alley. So I started doing some research. I figured out that the person lived in Bristol, Connecticut, 2.6 miles from me, even though it was a person related to the Karen Reed case. And it was the craziest thing to ever find out. But what this person would do is he was basically, he had a second account that was a female account, and they were pretending to be a person who sold adult content on the internet.
Oh, no.
And what they were doing, though, is they were befriending other girls, and they were either convincing them to start OnlyFans sites, or they were befriending girls that were already selling content and learning as much as they could about them while trying to pretend that they were friends. And then they'd go back and try and blackmail them with their mail account and say, like, I'm going to send pictures to your father. I'm going to send pictures to your grandfather, and all of this craziness. Like, it was absolutely crazy. So I ended up by right then and there, two things happened. I said, I have to expose this person. Like, I have to. It's the right thing to do.
Sure.
And I can no longer pretend that I'm being a female on social media because this
guy is.
This is how it never struck me as that this was how I could be perceived as doing
Sure.
something similar to that. So I immediately changed. I didn't reveal my identity and I didn't reveal my gender, but I immediately put up a pinned post saying, "Who is Hailey Walbrecht?" and told people not to assume my gender. Don't assume I was a man or a woman. And I also, at the same time, that kind of launched off a bunch of people coming to me for help. So people were coming to me in the DMs. I have this situation that I'm in and I need help, or I need advice, or I need this. So I was always telling people, like, okay, like, I'd love to hear your story, but before I do, I want you to know not to assume that I'm a man or a woman. And if you need to talk to somebody, if you want them to be a specific gender, tell me and I'll find someone that you can speak to.
Right.
Nobody ever did. Everyone always told me their story. And so I just felt better about it being Hailey Walbrecht in a way that was more authentic, so that people knew that that was going to be my pen name or my anonymous account, but not the persona that I was trying to be. I wasn't trying to trick anyone. Initially I was, because I didn't know what to do and I was new to this. But the other thing that happened at exactly the same time was, because people were actually listening to my opinion suddenly and hearing what I had to say, and now I was performing a service by trying to go after these people. Turtleboy had gotten out of jail because he had gotten arrested, as we know, in December.
December, yeah.
And I had plenty of things to say about him on my account. The tweets are still up. I've called him a scumbag numerous times, all kinds of things, because I had opposed some of the things that he had done, right? And he got out of jail and he saw one of my posts where I might have said something about him in the post. And he contacted me via DM and he said, "Hailey, I'm not who you think I am. Like, I'm not the person that they're saying I am." And so I decided to hear him out and have a conversation with him. And right then and there, when I started to understand what was happening in his case, I had already kind of known that he was set up, and I had already started putting pieces together about how it happened and the conspiracy between Kate Peter and Lindsay Gaetani and Leah Genduso and all of these people. I knew right then and there that just like everyone else who was coming to me for help, like, he was also a victim of that. So, real life is complicated. It's not always black and white. So there are people that say, well, Aiden Carney harasses people. And there are people that say he's horrible and he does all of these things. Now that I've gotten to know the situation and the people in it better, like, I understand that at least 50% of what they say about him is an invention by Kate Peter and people trying to frame the narrative around him versus who he actually is.
Very true.
And on the other side, I said, all of these people are out here opposing him every day. You have this whole troll mafia that's literally designed just to go after Aiden Carney. I said, I'm gonna stop criticizing him while I'm advocating for him, because I don't think anybody should be falsely charged with a crime. It's the reason that I'm advocating for Karen Reed to begin with. It's the entire thing where I'm saying they're framing her, and now I see an example of where they're framing him. And I was able to kind of put aside whatever differences I had philosophically in his approach to being a journalist or whatever else he was doing. I said, I'm not gonna let that affect my ability to advocate for him, because that's about my principles. And since I've gotten to know him, I actually feel differently than I did that first day about him too. I've gotten to know him a little bit more, and I feel a little bit better about that. But for me, it is and always has been about the fact that I don't care. I'm not here to judge everybody in every aspect of their personality, and I don't need to go after Aiden Carney every day, because there's plenty of people doing that. I'm just going to advocate for him as a victim like I would any other victim in this scenario, just like I do for Karen Reed. So that's kind of how. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh no, go ahead. That's how, though, the Hailey Walbrecht and then the Not Hailey.
Yeah, so Not Hailey came about when I was doxxed. So in September I was doxxed, and I didn't want to just completely abandon the name Hailey Walbrecht, because it, let's face it, in addition, sorry, let me just back up 1 second. When Aiden Carney contacted me and when I exposed this predator were relatively close in time, like within a week or so. And when I first started talking to him and learning about that story, I was so offended. I've always been in love with the First Amendment, which is kind of our topic tonight. And I was so offended that they would, to me, say whatever you want about the 19 felony witness intimidation charges they filed against him in October. I think that
Mhm.
the majority of those are, from what they're bogus, they're out of context, they're things. So I can be offended about that. But that one in December, when basically they filed the initial witness intimidation charges against him to shut him up. And then it didn't work. He kept talking. He kept doing these things. So they came up with this other plan, assisted by Kate Peter, to come up with the plan to say, if we charge him with one more, he's out on bond, so we can have him arrested. And
Sure.
I was so offended by that and seeing that I just said, you know what? Like, I love the First Amendment. I've been talking about it for years. I have all these other things. Like, why don't I become an independent journalist? And that really is what kind of led me down the path. I think it was it was either the day that I exposed Rich Smith or the day that I first posted in support of Aiden Carney that I went into my bio and I changed my bio to say independent journalist. And I put a little quote in there that's there to this day. Because I just said, you know what, I've had enough. There was one third incident too, which was there was a Judge Bev failed to turn the cameras off, and there was a juror who was pictured. And then Judge Bev issued an order that anyone who had broadcast the picture had to go back and remove it. And I said, that's unconstitutional. First of all, it's your mistake. And second of all, that's unconstitutional for you to now come back and tell the media that they can't. And part of me said, like, yeah, I understand why some of the media complied because, you know, they have a press pass and they want to keep it and they don't want to have her go to the Supreme Judicial Court
Right, and go
media
through the whole
committee
song and
and have
dance,
their
yeah.
press pass reversed and do all of these things, and it wasn't worth it. But I didn't post the picture until after she issued that order. So I posted the picture because I said, I don't want to wish any harm upon this juror. I probably would have never posted this photo if this controversy didn't exist. But now I'm posting the picture because the principle of it for me was, who are you? I'm sitting here in Connecticut. I'm not even a Massachusetts resident, and you're not going to order me not to post a picture that your negligence allowed to be broadcasted on TV, you know?
Precisely. And, you know, the foreman of the jury also was doxxed a couple months ago, and,
Yeah.
I mean, that isn't a crime. It's not a crime to post information that, you know, maybe the government wanted concealed, but if they are the ones who released it, or if a court official released it by mistake, then no, it is by no means a crime for the press to pass it along to the public.
Yeah, and so now before we get into my doxing, that to me was I ended up by writing some articles. I started to write articles about this conspiracy, and I planned it as a series always. And one of the things that I wanted to do is I wanted to introduce people to who Lindsay Gaetani was, because they knew that this thing happened in December and there was this thing, but not many people knew too much about her other than that she had an affair. She was Turtleboy's mistress or whatever. Which I also am not going to judge people on. You know, people are adults and they make their own decisions. But so I knew that we had this scenario where this Lindsay Gaetani was out there, but I started to do a little bit more research into her. And I had a source provide me with some court documents, some probate court documents regarding an earlier case where she had a custody issues with her parents. And I started to notice some trends in there about how she was kind of manipulating the court system and different things that she would do. So I ended up by writing a couple of articles about that. And then my third article in this series was where I actually got into the framing of Aiden Carney. And that was, it's controversial. I have people that are coming after me and say, you're going after somewhere in there in April, they released the Commonwealth released the phone extraction to Aiden Carney and Discovery, and they basically released a phone extraction of Lindsay Gaetani's entire phone instead of a limited in scope. And the only thing missing from the phone extraction was messages that were implicating Lieutenant Tully or Ken Mello. So they said that they released a full extraction, and everyone was supposed to believe that. But later on, Kate Peter had a YouTube stream where she had something pulled up in the background, and it turned out to be a message from that extraction that should have been there that was missing in the copy that they gave to Carney.
Wow.
So now I'm writing about this stuff, but once that information was released, suddenly Lindsay Gaetani said Aiden Carney committed sexual assault against me in October. She hadn't alleged it. There was none of these things that happened, but it was the phone extraction was released, and she was called down to the Medfield police to talk about potential wiretapping charges against her. And in the context of those two things happening, suddenly she remembered a time that she was unable to consent. And she actually played a video for the police officers, and I'm not going to describe the graphic nature of the video that she played, but the video basically showed her alert in a standing position, participating in sexual activity.
We're clearly conscious. Yeah.
yeah, it's clearly conscious, although that wasn't the way that it was billed. And I now had also started seeing, because Aiden Carney was not my source on the first two stories about Lindsay Gaetani. In fact, the only thing that he did was provide me with a phone number that I asked him for Lindsay Gaetani's ex.
Okay.
But on the third story, he's actually somewhat said online that he was my source. So I'll admit that he was one of my sources on that story. And I did start to look into not her. I never got her extraction, and I never wanted it, because that was discovery in his case, and I don't want to do anything to mess up anyone's case, especially not someone I'm advocating for.
Right.
So what I did start to see, though, is I did start to see some specific text messages from his phone that were able to allow me to see things in a light where she's making these claims. One of the most famous ones was in December of 2021, Kate Peter made a tweet in September, October of this year saying, Lindsay Gaetani did not want to have anything to do with Aiden Carney, from December 20th until the day that this happened, or December 19th, for the entire week. And I was able to produce a message from Lindsay Gaetani that was asking Aiden Carney to come over her house for sexual activity. Like, it was
right.
So
clearly proving otherwise.
She clearly lured him there. It wasn't it's not even close. Like, so everything that I've seen just furthers this theory of the conspiracy that I've been talking about. So things were a little bit controversial for me at that time, because I did have people saying, you're an advocate, because I don't just advocate for people who are wrongly accused. I advocate for victims of domestic violence and for victims of sexual assault. And for a long time in those communities, you have this theory that was spread around that was believe all women. And people were saying to me, you're an advocate for women. Like, how come you don't have to believe all women? And I said, well, because women, like every other human, sometimes they lie.
They lie. Yeah. Everybody. Yeah. It doesn't matter how you were born.
Right. And as somebody
who's
been advocating for victims since 2019, I have seen firsthand examples of this on both sides. People have come to me and asked me to help them, and I found out that they're lying, and people on the other side have lied. Sometimes people lie. So so I always do my due diligence and do things. So I was already kind of dealing with that. Come September, I got doxxed. And the way that I got doxxed was the worst way of all, because I got doxxed because I was in a message thread with a friend who I talk to every day. I still talk to that friend almost every day. And I made a joke. And I made a joke about a woman who not everyone knows in this case, but her name is Jules the Medium. And she is from Gardner, Mass, and says she's a medium. And what she's known for is being very sexually explicit online. And all of her comments, my first interaction with her as HAILEY, while people still thought I was a girl, was her asking me to sit on her face publicly in a comment thread. And I have hundreds of screenshots. She's sexually harassed witnesses in the case. There's all of these things. So I have hundreds of screenshots. But in full disclosure, back in February, when she was hitting on me pretty hard for about a 2-day period, and I would just politely laugh it off, because I was still trying to pretend I was a woman. She had been in my DMs for weeks, and at one point she started talking about information and saying that she had this uncle who was an FBI agent, and he knew something about the case, and she had this information. So I made the decision, which was completely the wrong decision, to kind of play along with her for a day. So when she started getting sexually explicit in the DMs, I responded and said to her, she's like, I wish you would sit on my face. And I'm like, oh, so would I, you know what I mean? Because I was just like
starting to kind of reciprocate to keep
I'm going to get some information from her. But one
Yes.
thing that I always did in those conversations was I always said, but none of this matters because I'm in a relationship and I'm faithful and I would never cheat on my significant other. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
So I always played along a little, but never enough to make it seem like there was actually going to be this connection. So this was also before I exposed that predator. And I did this for about a day. And then I realized like this is wrong. Like I shouldn't do this. And I stopped it. So that was all
Mhm.
the way back in February. I spent about a day doing that. I also, when I exposed the predator, put up a post publicly apologizing to her and saying that you know, I was trying to use her to maintain my cover and get information, and that I, in hindsight, think that was the wrong thing to do. And I put up a big public apology post. Post is still on my channel. I mean, still on my ex profile. So if people want to go back and find it, they can.
There's a lot of ethics to navigate in journalism, that's for sure. But
Right.
it's
And
great
it's,
that you at least publicly, if you feel that you've made a mistake, you are very open about it.
and that was literally, I had just decided to become a journalist. I really didn't know much about it. And investigative journalism is even worse because you do sometimes want to put yourself in a position where you want to be undercover. You don't want people to know what you're doing or what you're writing about or who you are. Um,
Right.
so I did that, but that was already long over, right? So by the time we get to September, that was long over. But I was having a conversation with one of my friends who I talk to almost every day. And to me, like she had always been my friend, and we had talked about the stuff in February with Jules the Medium, and we'd done these different things. And she had made a prediction about something that was going to happen in the trial. And it did happen. So the next day I messaged her and I said, "Oh, like we said this was going to happen yesterday and it happened. Like maybe we should be Jules, that people should call us the mediums now instead of Jules or whatever." And the woman came back to me and said, "I like where your head is at." And then I replied as Jules the medium and I said, "Oh, I wish it was between your legs." Like
Oh boy.
it it was a it was a crude joke, but
Mhm.
the minute that I did that, I then went into and I said like, "Oh, I could do this all day, ha ha ha," or whatever. And then I went
Doubling down.
into and then I went in well, no, just like implying that, yeah, I'm joking. Yeah, ha, I could do this all day. I went right after that in the conversation. What you don't see is that we immediately started talking about someone that we both knew in real life, a woman that died, and I sent her a picture of the woman's husband and kid. I was in no way hitting on her or trying to have any kind of interaction with her. We
Sure.
immediately, minutes later, were talking about someone who died or whatever else. Um, but in the moment, the person that I was having that conversation with was sent it to another person who
Oh boy.
who I'm also very good friends with. She sent a screenshot of it and basically said, "Hey, I was talking to Haley and I was talking to Haley and this just happened." It was more of like, "Oh my God, like look at this," like it was a surprise or whatever.
Mhm.
And then that person sent it to a third person, and the third person turned out to be someone who was an admin on the Free Karen Read Facebook group who was a mole for Kate Peter.
Oh
And so
no.
then that person took that information and went to the other side and I was doxxed.
It
Um,
exploded, yeah.
yep. And so when I got doxxed, I turned around and I changed my name to not Haley Walbrecht instead of Haley Walbrecht. And I kept the profile picture and it's still up there to this day because it makes the trolls really, really mad that I refuse to change it. And that kind of makes me happy. So it's a long story, but it is how Haley Walbrecht came to be. Or not Haley
Well,
Walbrecht, as the case may be.
well, and you now have your name in your bio, and keeping that picture and the not Haley Walbrecht kind of maintains the any readers, followers who associate that photo with you. So I've got a couple questions in the chat for you already. So
Yeah,
Brandy
that's great.
says, I was just wondering how serious cops take extortion cases. Will the person actually get in trouble for the threat? Or does it have to happen several times? I think this is when you were going over that guy who would somewhat
Oh,
blackmail the girls.
yeah, this is great. So especially in Massachusetts, because even though I happen to be in Connecticut and so does he, that most of these things happened to women who were in Massachusetts because it was women surrounding the Karen Reed case. I would say all over the country,
Sure.
really. He extortion is really interesting because I have researched the law in Massachusetts because we're having a conversation about Shot on the Gulf attempting to have Aiden Carney arrested for something involving extortion. So extortion or attempted extortion in Massachusetts requires there to be a pecuniary interest. So, and that just basically means money, right? So if
Mhm.
this guy was contacting women and saying, if you pay me, I won't release
Oh,
this information, that would be extortion or attempted extortion. But because it didn't involve a pecuniary interest, so anything of like financial value, it would not be considered extortion. There are several, second degree harassment. There's other charges that they could get the person on. But the
uh-huh.
problem is, and right off the bat, this is something that I have to encounter quite a bit when you're advocating for victims. A lot of times, so these are women who have not been doxxed. They have not had their pictures shared with their father or their brother or their grandfather. They haven't done any of these things. They're extremely
Mhm.
afraid to actually come forward. So while I spoke with multiple women who were in this situation with this person, every one of them spoke with me on the condition that I would keep their names anonymous and that I would not report their specific cases to the authorities and that I
Oh,
would not do those things. And I have to respect them and their wishes in that situation because you're not always going to do. So what I did decide to do in that case is I decided to publicize his behavior and I decided to warn people about it. And great people like some of whom are in the chat right now actually help me with that, and they take my story and they're able to resend it to people when they see people start interacting with it with this person, and that's kind of the best I can do. I did
mhm.
actually report his general behavior to law enforcement.
Right,
um
you had multiple victims really in that
yep.
case.
And the person he was catfishing to for the photo was actually a newscaster here in Connecticut. So I was able to contact them and say, hey, this person's using your photos to do these things. And they contacted law enforcement and they had a I don't want to go too far into that, but they basically had the security for the TV station that they worked for got involved with local law enforcement and having conversation. And then I spoke with those people as well. So I do know that the person's being watched, and I know that the cases are being taken seriously. Um, Behind the scenes, ever since I've exposed that person, they've been out to get me. They've been doing different things.
I'm sure.
But
I'm
but I'd
sure.
rather but I'm willing to take the heat, and I do feel
Mhm.
bad because sometimes my family gets wrapped up into that and caught in that, and it's a catch-22. It's a fine line to walk on what you wanna do and what you don't wanna do, but I just have a hard time not helping people who are in
Yeah.
situations like that.
Yeah, definitely. It seems like the whole thing's kind of a rock and a hard place situation. And then another question also from Brandy. Thank you, Brandy. She says, is there any current roadblock you can think of that you wish legislation would change immediately? Why, yes, Brandy.
Yeah,
there
yeah.
there absolutely is relating to advocating for people. You can go ahead and answer that, Jason.
Yeah, so the first thing is, it's actually how my YouTube channel got started because I wasn't ready to start it yet. I am working on this video about Grant, which was going to be my first video. And I put out a video because in that case where Lindsay Gaetani had threatened, so Lindsay Gaetani had threatened a woman by the name of Mary because Mary went on a YouTube show and talked about an experience over, I think I told you this backstage, so I'm trying to just rehash it. Mary had gone on a YouTube channel and talked about an incident that happened at a pool party over the summer at some of the anti-Karen Reed people's houses. And in that, Lindsay Gaetani's child was in the pool. They had taken off their flotation device because instead of having like swimmies like normal kids would, Lindsay didn't
Hmm.
have anything, and they stopped and bought life preservers instead. When you put kids in the pool with a life preserver, it rides up under their arms and they get
Yes.
like chafing. So the the kid wanted to play on a boogie board. She took off the life preserver. She fell into the pool. And this woman, Mary's son, who was a teenager, ended up by like going under the water and pulling the kid out, obviously, so that they wouldn't drown. And whenever you criticize anything to do with Lindsay Gaetani or her parenting, she says that you're attacking her kids. Like it's always you're attacking my children, right? My children. No, they're talking about you
You
and
and your behavior. Yeah.
the other thing that the woman said that's backed up by an independent witness is that Lindsay Gaetani arrived drunk, driving with her children, and that she had like a Stanley with wine in it, and she had already consumed like a half a bottle of wine. And essentially, they put her Stanley over in like a cooler somewhere to kind of get it away from her, so she wouldn't know where it was, because they were trying to not have the situation be when she left the same. Now there are other people at the party that dispute all of this, that say none of this happened. I don't know what's true or not. I do know that I believe this woman because I have extensively talked to her about it. And the other person, her friend that was there at the party, backs her story up. So I tend to believe them because they don't really have anything to gain by telling this story, whereas the other people definitely have something to gain by denying it.
Not to
So
mention there's other, instances that we've heard of that involve that type of behavior on her part.
it's true. And so what ends up by happening is this woman calls in. She doesn't have a Twitter. She's not engaged in this drama every day. But over the previous month to 5 or 6 weeks, she and her friend had left. They had left the anti side. In fact, the only reason they were ever anti Karen Reed was because they believed the lie that there was a text message that from between Karen and David Yannetti, where Karen told David Yannetti that she hit John O'Keefe. And this was the
Okay.
lie that was created by Kate Peter and the other side, because what they were trying to do was they were trying to just divide up the Free Karen Reed people and stem some of the conversation that was going in the wrong direction. So it was at least promoted by those people, this lie. And they believed it. And once they were hanging around these people and going to a pool party at Carrie Lama's house and all of these things happening, they ended up by coming to the conclusion that how come nobody's ever showed us this text message? How come we haven't seen it? And like, what's going on here? They figured out that they were being lied to, and that made them start to question everything they were being told. And so both of those people left that side of the movement and became independent and started listening to more people. And now both of those people believe Karen Reed is innocent.
Okay. Same as
So,
that ring camera footage that they claimed to
there
have
you
at the
go.
very beginning. I mean, they said they had it all on tape and that tape never appeared. So,
So when Mary left their little group, she kind of became a threat to them, right? So they
mhm,
were a group of mean girls, I'll call them. On the other
mhm.
side were over there, and they were in the DMs. They were basically hitting Mary and this other woman all the time. They're coming after them in the DMs and calling them horrible names and saying these things. And then about a week before Mary called into this show, one of them started doing it publicly on Twitter, even though this woman doesn't have a Twitter account. Her
Oh, wow.
friends do. And so they started hitting her publicly because, these people to them are considered to be traitors, right? Because they left
Mhm.
their little protective bubble.
Yes.
So what happened is Mary called into the JFK show. So JFK
Mhm.
show off, I
And
think is the
Jackson,
title.
yeah.
Yeah, and James Jackson. And Mary told the story about the pool party. And when Mary did that and she told that story, sure, she was mad because they had been hitting her for 6 weeks or whatever, and she just wanted to get her side of the story out. But
Sure.
the story's actually so unbelievable when you hear it in context, when you hear Mary tell it, that JFK and James Jackson didn't really believe her. They didn't actually,
Mm.
and you could tell that they were kind of making fun of her a little bit in there because they were like, okay, lady. And when she got off, they played something like they have some song that they play if they think you're lying. So they
Oh,
played this
okay.
song. All of this is happening. I don't know it. Then all of a sudden, this woman gets a whole bunch of phone calls in a row. They're from a blocked number. She doesn't answer. She finally answers after about 7 or 8 times. And here's Lindsay Gaetani screaming at her and swearing and saying all kinds of things. So what this woman did is she said to Lindsay, you can't threaten me. I'm going to record this phone call. So she recorded the call, and you hear Lindsay in the call saying, she called her every name in the book, and then I'm going to come to your house and murder you and your children, screaming at her.
Oh my
Um,
gosh.
and I have the audio on my Twitter page. When you hear it, it's
Mhm.
chilling. You hear it and you're like, oh my goodness, like I can understand why this lady is freaking out.
Oh, sure.
The
I
the call
mean,
ends. the call ends, and in real time, what's happening is she calls her friend, who's also my friend. She calls her friend that had left that side with her, and she starts saying, "What do I do?" And they're like, "You have to call the police." So they're trying to find information like Lindsay Gaetani's address and other things. I happen to have some of that information. So they're trying to contact me. And it was like the one night of the year that I was actually asleep by like 10 p.m. I was in bed. I'd been awake all night the day before, and I missed their calls and their text messages. So I woke up at like 4:30 in the morning, and I say, "Oh my goodness, what's happening? How can I help?" And I get a copy of the audio from the phone call. It was the first I heard about it. And then I went back and I found the segment. I came downstairs to my office at 4:30 in the morning, and I found the segment on the JFK show to hear the story. It's a story I had already heard. But I hear her telling the story. I see everything that's happening, and I'm like, wow, like this lady needs some help. So I reached out to her and I started talking to her to see how I could advocate for her in the situation. And it's insane that this occurred, because we ended up in this situation where the next day, so the woman went down to the court and she got a harassment prevention order against Lindsay Gaetani.
Mm-hmm.
The return date for that is actually Tuesday, on Christmas Eve.
Oh, okay. I'm surprised
And
they're working.
yeah, me too. But so she got a harassment prevention order, and she was so scared that her friend had to handwrite her affidavit because her hands were shaking. So she had to dictate her affidavit to her friend, who wrote it down. And
Oh,
as
wow.
it turns out, when they called the police that night and the police responded, the woman played the recording for the police so they could hear it. And her 17-year-old son that she thought was asleep was awake, and he overheard the recording. And so that kid didn't sleep for several days because
Oh, sure.
I got to protect my mom. Here's my single mom here, and she was looking out for us, and now I have to protect her because someone's coming to kill her. And that's how convincing the audio is. Like, if you hear the
Oh.
audio, she means it when she says it, at least. So now we have that. The woman has the HPO, and I started telling this story for a reason. Hang on, I'm going to get back there.
Legislation. Brandon was
Yeah.
asking about legislation.
So the very next day, so the police, they go, they serve the HPO, they say you're not allowed to contact her or whatever else. The very next day, Lindsay Gaetani comes down to the police station in Mansfield, Mass, and she insists that the woman be charged with wiretapping for recording the conversation where Lindsay Gaetani threatened her life and
But
her
didn't
children's
she
life.
say that she was going to be recording the conversation?
She did, but she said it prior to
Uh-huh.
starting the recording, because she's
Oh,
saying,
okay.
I have to notify someone I'm going to record the call. So she said it and she started the recording. But what's even worse, so the police were actually unsure of how to handle this situation. And I initially said, "Oh, you're never going to get charged with that. Like, you're the victim here, and they're this." And then somebody sent me a copy of an article from September in Mass, where a domestic abuser was able to get away with it because his victim had recorded him. And if she testified and said that she had recorded the call, they had basically charged her with wiretapping. So her attorney had to tell her to plead the fifth.
Oh, my
And so her
word.
abuser actually got away with it because she couldn't testify against him at his trial. So now,
Right. Completely turns the tables onto the victim.
so now I decided to make my YouTube channel, because I called Mary back after I had that information, because I'm the one telling her not to worry about it. And I don't want to be in that position if she should be worried about it. So I called her back and said, maybe we need to talk to an attorney. And I started asking her questions about, how did you record the phone call? Like, give me the details. And she told me, well, I have my iPhone, and I have, iOS 18. And when you make a phone call now, there's a little thing in the top left corner while you're on the
Mhm.
phone that if you press it, it records the phone call. And I say, it does. And I'm like, oh, this is great. Like, can we, like, tell me what happens? She's, well, when you hit record, it announces to the phone call that this call is being recorded, and there's a beep. And so I went back and I did some research, and I took my iPad and I took my cell phone and I made a FaceTime call and I did the thing. And what I figured out is it doesn't record the warning either. It gives the warning and beeps for all parties, and then it starts recording. So it never records it giving itself the warning.
Secretly, right. And that's
Right.
probably so that, just kind of as a blanket, Apple doesn't get in trouble
It's true. So
for in any state.
but I think they should record the warning too. Like I actually have sent a message. I've sent an improvement request to Apple to ask them to record the warning so that people have proof that
Right.
the audible, because it turns out there are 11 states in the United States, including Massachusetts, that are two-party consent states, which means you are required to have the consent of both parties on the phone call. So
Yes.
when we talk about a current roadblock that we can think of in terms of legislation, I think that they should take these states that are these two-party consent states. I think every one of those should become a one-party consent state, because people don't need to be protected from what they say to someone else. People should assume
Right.
that whatever they say can be recorded and used against them in terms of, this whole, if you want to have a secret clandestine meeting with somebody, then go ahead and do that in person.
Take their
And if you
phones. Yeah.
Right. If you want to, there are any number of ways to do that. Technology has surpassed the need for this two-party consent law. But if you're going to keep a
Right.
two-party consent law, then you damn well better write it an exception to people who are recording other people threatening them.
I agree.
because they're trying to capture evidence of a crime, and in some cases it's the only way they can protect themselves. So
That's very true. I can list a handful of incidents just, from what I've observed in my own personal life where that would be 100% relevant. And, technology has us at a point now where there really isn't privacy
no,
anymore anyway. I mean, that's almost behind us.
it is. If you walk out the door, you're on camera basically
Mhm,
everywhere you go. People have dash cameras in their car. There's surveillance
mhm,
cameras and everything. People have ring cameras on their front door. This illusion of privacy in public is gone.
right.
Um,
And you don't have to put a sign on your car or a
right.
sign on your front door that says, "Hey, this is being recorded. You are on camera. Smile."
I
So, yeah,
I
it's
act
gone.
It's funny because I get questions about this stuff all the time. And literally just yesterday, someone reached out to me and said, I have a friend whose daughter was at a swim meet and there was some creepy guy and they caught him zooming in and taking photos. And I actually had an experience like this. Um, with my wife, we were at a swim meet. We went to support some friends who were having that were running the swim meet, and we were watching
Mhm.
some of what was going on. And there were two old men who were sitting in the row in front of us, and I could see they were at least in their 60s, 70s, more likely, and they
Ooh.
were zooming in on the crotches of the boys wearing their speedos. And we were able to go get security and have them thrown out and go through this entire process. But the truth is you can take pictures in public and no one can do anything about it. I had an experience with one of my own kids where I chased somebody down and the police are like, well, they're in public. So even if someone's taking a picture of your kid, as creepy and horrific as that is, if you're in public, they can do it. Now, I advise anyone not to do that around me
Oh, yeah.
because we're going to have a competition to see what laws apply to what in that moment. But in the grand scheme of things, there really is no privacy.
Right.
And
Absolutely.
actually, this show being about First Amendment rights, it is people's First Amendment right to record what they see in public. The law is really specific when it comes to recording government officials, but it's only a matter of time before all 50 states have the law. You can't trespass somebody's eyes. So
No,
whatever they can see in public, they can take a picture of. And as much as I wish that weren't the case in certain circumstances, in others, it's beneficial. So
I'm
you
with you. Nikki says, "I know this crap happens everywhere, Jason, but why do you think there is so much concentrated in Massachusetts? Only due to media, or there really is just so much in mass, or all the above?" I
actually
mean,
had
there
you go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, yeah, there really does seem to be a lot currently surrounding the Massachusetts legislation, either regarding journalism, the lack of shield laws there, or um, the witness intimidation statute, which we're gonna go on about here tonight. So yeah, what are your thoughts there, Jason?
So more generally, I'm assuming that her answer is about the corruption and all of these things that are happening around the case. And my theory on that is, I think I talked about it a little bit in the comments last week, or I don't know if it was last week that you had Andrew on, but I do believe I really kind of like what's going on in Norfolk County, Massachusetts, because we have all of these things that are in kind of epicentered in this one area that are a
Mhm.
microcosm of what's happening everywhere. But
Right.
but we now know of that we have 4 or 5 or different cases that are happening in that one little area and that one state police unit and all of these things that are happening there. Um, it's a great example of how we have cases that aren't related. So we have the Just on Route case, which is a case of a mentally ill person who had a paintball gun and he was shot by the police. And
Mhm.
at first blush, everyone hears about that case and they say, oh, well, he had a paintball gun and it was probably a good shoot. And I say, well, if you could say that outside the mental hospital that first 6 shots were a good shoot, explain to me the other 31 shots in Brookline that where
When
he
he
didn't
was
have a
on the
gun
ground. Right.
and basically dead, right?
Well,
And
and
that
then, his sister actually came on this show last week.
I
She was on Tuesday, and she actually, she shared a lot more details about it, and
mhm.
I was able to privately see photos of what he actually had in his hands,
I've seen them
and
as well, yeah.
yeah, it was pretty evident that that was not a real weapon. That was a toy, you know?
I love Jen Rue. I always say that she should be everybody's sister. Like that's the person that you want to be your sister. For her to carry this
Agreed.
on, she spent well over $150,000 of her own money on attorneys. They
Mhm.
literally have a cert petition before the U.S. Supreme Court. There's all of this stuff going on. She's amazing. We have that
She is.
case. You have the Sandra Birchmore case where obviously we all know what happened in that case. You have the John O'Keefe case. So you have between John O'Keefe or Karen Reed, you can advocate for either one of them in this situation.
Mhm.
Um, you have all of these cases that are really have nothing to do with each other. Sandra Birchmore was murdered by an ex who was trying to cover up the fact that he groomed her as a child and got her pregnant while he was married to someone else who was also pregnant. You have this situation where John O'Keefe's death was either a murder or a tragic accident, depending on what side you believe in. The only
Mhm.
thing that they all have in common is the Norfolk County District Attorney's Office and that state police squad of detectives who work for the Norfolk County District Attorney's Office. The same names, the same people are the ones who
Mhm.
investigated all of these crimes. And all of these crimes had something to do with legal liability or potential legal liability for a police officer. Um,
It is kind of nice that almost like that zit is coming to a head, kind
yep.
of all in the same place, and it's gonna make people start to ask those same types of questions about, not just Massachusetts, but also where they live.
Well, it's true, and we know it's not confined to so Norfolk County is great because we have these different examples of different types of cases where you can see the corruption and you can see why because it's law enforcement corruption. Um, but you move on to Worcester County and you have the, Enrique Delgado Garcia case there. And then you have the Molly Bish case, which is a long-term cold case where the district attorney simply won't give up the case to a district attorney 1 county over in Hampden County, Mass, who actually has the tools and resources to close these kind of cold cases and is willing to take the case. But the district attorney Joe Early has reached this impasse with the family of Molly Bish where he's not even giving them information anymore.
Wow.
And they're at odds with each other. And that guy should just take this case, which they haven't solved in 30 years, and hand it over to the district attorney who is known for solving cold cases 1 county over, but he can't because he doesn't want to, it's his image that gets affected. So
Agreed.
you end up in these situations where you say this stuff is happening everywhere, but this microcosm of them is good for us because it allows people to finally wake up and see, like, oh my goodness, this stuff really happened. Like this is not just
Absolutely.
a story that's told. So taking the question in context of why is this only happening in Massachusetts? I do believe that you do have more of it, especially in Eastern Massachusetts, kind of with the fall of organized crime in the Irish Mafia, the Winter Hill Gang, because
Mhm.
you had a lot of police corruption and federal corruption, I might add, involved with Whitey Bulger in those cases. And then there was a vacuum that was created when all of that got swept up. In fact, a lot of the people that were involved in that on a lower level, they all went legit. You know what I mean? Same thing
Right.
with a lot of the Italian mob in Springfield, Mass, and the New York mob coming up through the Hartford corridor. A lot of that those people went legit, or maybe not 100% legit, but much more legit than they were in this kind of extortion ring and all of that stuff. It still happens, but it's not quite as prevalent as it was. It's more underground. And I do think
Yeah.
in the case of Eastern Massachusetts that basically you had this whole corrupt law enforcement structure that when a power vacuum was created, they filled it. I
Yeah,
really do think
absolutely.
that, and I think it's so ingrained in the organizations like the Mass State Police that it's almost impossible to get rid of. And I do think
Mhm.
that they try. I don't actually believe that they're okay with it, but I don't think they're ever going to publicly admit it. And I do think that
Sure.
you had the trooper overtime scandal, you had all kinds of scandals in Massachusetts, state police specific, and there doesn't seem to be any end in sight because these things just perpetuate generation after generation after generation.
Right, and it has kind of, it has made its way almost into every branch. I mean, if when you're mentioning like the overtime scandal, even the laboratories
The labs were
are
the worst.
yeah, they're having scandals, so it really is everywhere. And then tying into how that's just kind of embedded itself into the culture and metastasized through. I mean, it's almost as though, like Morrissey, for example, the DA in Norfolk County, he doesn't even seem to care how some of his actions look
It
anymore because they're so confident that they're not going to have any kind of consequences and that they're not going anywhere. Um, it's insane to me. That's just how little they think of the public now
it
that
it's true. It's actually such a great point because they really do, and it's the same thing. We when we look at the specific acts of corruption in these cases, you have these things that the inverted Sallyport video is a great example of like this is going to come out, and like when it comes out, what are you going to do? Like they don't even care. And in the Just
Mhm.
on Route case, you have the police officer who emptied his clip into Justin, who was the initial police officer who shot first, before they did the chase into Brookline.
Mhm.
And that cop took his body camera off and threw it in the car. And nobody's ever seen that body
Yes.
camera footage. And you have
Yes.
these other cops. The only reason we know it happened is it appeared on another police officer's body cam where he threw the body. You see that he was recording, and then he took his body cam off and threw it.
And
Um,
how long did it take for us to even get that footage, or for Jen to get that footage too? I mean, at
and
first,
she hasn't gotten it all. You know, and
unbelievable.
you have the same bystander video caught some of that too. There wasn't even video in their control. It's the only reason we know about it. And you have the same thing in the Sandra Birchmore case. There's all of these things that the FBI found. Didn't find any of them. The Mass State Police from the Norfolk County
Yeah.
District Attorney's Detective Squad, they
Moreno,
proclaimed that
yep.
it was a suicide and that everything was fine. That this woman just committed suicide. People say, "Oh, the FBI is interfering with Karen Reed's case." Well, thank God, and thank God they
Mhm.
interfered with Sandra Birchmore's case,
Yeah, no kidding.
because you have these scenarios, and when you say like they're doing this confidently, I've always said at some point, right, the Attorney General in Massachusetts or the governor at some point is going to have to. The political scale is going to tip, and at some point they're going to have to say something, but it doesn't happen. It doesn't happen. The political scale isn't tipping. So you end up with
Yeah.
this situation where the governor doesn't have to make a statement. She
Mhm.
hasn't even made a statement about Enrique Delgado, who's a state trooper.
No.
So
No.
the attorney general in the state of Massachusetts was just on Roots city councilor at the time that he was murdered. And
Oh my
and
word.
and the attorney general themselves had a situation with her brother in the police. I'm not sure if he was killed. I think he was. Um, So the attorney general herself had a situation and was constantly communicating with Jen Root up front. And when she got elected attorney general, she won't return her phone calls anymore. Like you don't even get to
Ugh,
talk to her. So you have these
unbelievable.
scenarios where it really is like you have even the people that are willing to help once they get into this entrenched position of power, they just shut their mouth. And we're kind of hoping that what we're doing, out here, and I don't just mean you and I, but I mean the people on the street outside the district attorney's office calling for his resignation and all of these other
Yes.
things, is going to force them to do something.
And then Morrissey's also, prosecuting based on statutes that he's manipulating.
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
Aiden Carney, for example, with the witness intimidation statute. I mean, that is that's a gross mishandling. It's vindictive and malicious prosecution, if you ask me, when on the other side of that coin, there actually is somebody who did commit felony witness intimidation. And it has been proven that it happened. We saw in Trooper Proctor's text messages that Julie Albert wanted to send a gift to Trooper Proctor for what he was doing for them in the John O'Keefe case, to which he responded, "Get something for my wife instead."
Which should have been the bigger scandal than the text message. I mean, it was bad enough that he was looking for nudes or whatever he said. But even if you could say that's a joke, right? Even if you could say, I don't believe it's a joke, but if you could say it was a joke or get out of it all those ways, it's real hard to get out of the buy the gift for my wife instead, because not only does it show that you're willing to accept a gift, it shows that you need to cover it up. And so you're actually taking steps to do that. So it really is it's unbelievable. And I'd say there's so many other acts of witness intimidation. And it's almost like we live in opposite land, because what you have is people who are actually intimidating witnesses.
Yes.
But let's take Carl Dougal, the Boston police officer who was friends with John O'Keefe, shoulder checking Karen Reed in the hallway of the courthouse. That's not witness intimidation. Like, that's a physical act. The statute in Mass, the witness intimidation statute, I believe is unconstitutional as written. So when we talk about constitutional challenges to laws, there's this: is the law blatantly unconstitutional because the way that it's written, or is it just as applied, which means they're taking a law and they're stretching it and applying it in an unconstitutional manner? I believe in this case it's both, because the section of you can't have laws that are vague to the point that you can't. Yes, that are vague and subjective to the point that people can't. The ordinary person can't come up with a reasonable understanding of what is or isn't a crime. You know what I mean? Based on that law, and laws that are too vague are void for vagueness, and that's exactly the ruling that's the structure that they use to do this. And so when you have a law that relies on the subjective intent of the person, their emotional feelings about what's happening to them versus any objective measure, it's real simple, right? If I am any one of those people, I could just go to the court. I don't want Aiden Carney talking about me, right? Especially if I'm in somehow, as has been alleged, involved in the cover-up of a murder. I don't want him writing stories about it. So if all I have to do is go to the court
and say that I'm sad.
I'm so sad about this. He's emotionally damaged me. Even the concept of, financial damage. They're taking these principles from civil law and they're trying to apply them to criminal law. If you want to sue Aiden Carney for defamation, and you want to try your chances in court of doing that, and you want to prove these financial damages or these intentional infliction of emotional distress, these aren't things that have a nexus in criminal law, except for in Massachusetts.
And then on top of that, I have the statute right here. They seem to almost be, as you mentioned, vague, not just about the action itself, but against it's vague with who could possibly be a victim of this crime. So when it starts going into who's a witness, it's basically any witness, anyone who is a family member or an associate of that witness, anyone in law enforcement, which is why Rich Schiffer, and Aiden Carney, I forget which officers. I know that Trooper Proctor's one, possibly Yuri
Buchanan, I
Buchanan.
think. Yeah, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's why they're victims. And then any officer of the court and any of their family members or associates. So that's just
It's
about anybody in Canton can be a witness.
especially Canton, right? Because Canton is a cop town, right? So this is a
Mhm.
city in the suburbs that has a oversized population of police officers from Boston and from other places that live within the city limits of Canton. It's a cop town. It's known as a cop
Mhm.
town. So is it any member of law enforcement, or is it just ones that are involved in investigating the case, or is it, you know what I mean? This is where I'm talking about with the
Exactly.
law being vague. And the bottom line is it's unconstitutionally applied, because we see this a lot in some of these cases where you can prevent people, there's only a certain number of limited exceptions to the First Amendment protections that
Mhm.
exist in the United States Constitution, and one of those is true threats, right? But
Yes.
true threats, the Supreme Court has jurisprudence on that, which, and it recently changed in a 2023 case. The name eludes me for a minute, but it came up in the context of the Karen Reed trial, in that this the person, there has to be some subjective or objective intent of the person to threaten in the process. It can't just be the subjective feelings of the person who was threatened. There has to be this objective intent. Like the person there's an intent requirement in the witness
Right.
intimidation law. It's already written in there.
That it
But
has
it's
to
being,
keep them from testifying in court, or with the intention of keeping them testifying in court.
or changing their testimony or doing something along those ways. And I don't
Sure.
think they can make that burden in any of Aiden Carney's cases. So in any of the counts of witness intimidation against him, I don't think they can make that work. And definitely not. Obviously, Rich Schiffer is no longer facing witness intimidation charges because that
And
was
thank
a crock.
goodness. Thank goodness.
I agree. But so as we get back to our, central theme of the First Amendment does give me the right to do what I do. I'm an independent journalist, and I can talk about people. And every time that I, throughout the whole summer and into the fall, and it still occurs to me, people are constantly saying, "Oh, you're being investigated for witness intimidation, and you're going to get arrested for witness intimidation." I hear it all the time.
Mhm.
So much so that the first time I went after I was doxxed and I was able to attend court in person, the first time I went to a court date for Aiden Carney, I put like a 26 character alphanumeric passcode on my phone, because I said, I took it off because it's so hard, but I shut my Face ID off and I put in like a 26 character alphanumeric passcode, because I said, if they take my phone, I'm going to want to at least have a chance to consult with a lawyer and
Exactly.
have the lawyer try to quash the subpoena before these people search my phone, since this is what they do when they get a phone into evidence. They just try and image it, and they try and crack their way into the phone, and they do
And they'll do
this
it
just
without
like
a
they did
warrant
with Aiden
too.
Carney's phones. Yeah.
Right. And and if they can get away with doing it with no warrant, they'll do that. Sherry says, "Oh, so scared." Trooper Michael Proctor, the big. I think what she's saying is that Trooper Proctor is obviously scared of Carney. He's making that admission. So is Buchanan, and
Right.
everybody
Right.
who is pressing these charges. That somehow these are scaring them. I
Yeah.
mean,
Well, and
that
we
is
also
quite an
had,
admission.
and with Carney, we have, if you actually look at the counts, especially the earlier counts, I think the December one is just, that's obviously, that count shouldn't even exist in terms of the witness intimidation of Lindsay Gaetani. But if you go back to the earlier accounts, you look at them, and he had a count for playing, for mocking the words of Colin Albert, his own
Mhm.
words. He just literally mocked Colin Albert's own words in a voicemail that he left him. He didn't say don't
Yes.
testify. He didn't say don't do that. All he did is mock his words, and it was the words that Colin Albert was using to threaten people. Come by, bang, bang, advantage boys. And Aiden Carney does it, and they take it out of context in the charging documents. So it looks like Aiden Carney just threatened Colin Albert, not repeated what Colin Albert said to someone else.
Right. Okay. So
And
yeah, that lack of context is making it
yes,
look a certain way.
and they did this intentionally with all of these charges. And you have to ask, like, how is this? Some of these things, the one disadvantage that we all have, you don't have to be in Canton, and you don't have to be prominent and somewhat hated like Aiden Carney. You have
Right.
to have this all you have to do is just have these people who have this intent to win. It could happen to any single one of us where they could stretch these things into charging us with a crime. And because the court system is so slow and inefficient everywhere, you could be facing these charges for 6 months, for a
Years.
year,
Yeah.
for multiple court appearances. And this happened. I actually have a really good friend here in Connecticut who was going through a divorce, and the parents were not doing a good job of communicating with each other. So she had suggested, and the court accepted, that they communicate through this app that they do to trade information back and forth, and they weren't supposed to communicate any other way. The woman's son it was a runner, and he signed up for like a half marathon, and they sent but he used his mother's email address or whatever because he was a minor and you had to have an adult. So they sent the confirmation to his mother's email address, and she forwarded it to his email address. Well, this kid's a junior and he has the same name as his father. So she accidentally forwarded the confirmation of the son's entry into this half marathon to the father. And they charged her. And you see that.
Just before I lose it, could she argue in court, if they're charging her, could she argue in court that because she did not write the email, she was simply forwarding information through it being a school function to him?
I mean, to me,
it's ridiculous anyway.
Right, there has to be an intent requirement, and the intent was that she intended to send the email to her son of the same name.
True.
So, to me, it's the case, like you're a prosecutor, you're looking at this, and this woman doesn't have a history of violence. The significant other does. So you're looking at this, and you're a prosecutor. This is a problem. What we have is these young prosecutors in these cases and things like that. There's this culture of you need to win as many cases as you can. If you want to move up in your career, you need to win as many cases. What the culture should be, you need to find the truth.
It's almost like they're taking a sales mentality.
It is exactly what they do. They take a sales mentality, and you have prosecutors. I've seen it because I sit in court with victims, and you have prosecutors that you'll literally see them up there making arguments. They'll do everything they can do not to drop a case that's a loser. Like, you watch the case and you're like, you would never be able to go stand out in public and give a press conference saying what you're saying here in court right now, because you would be ridiculed out of a job. Like, literally, when it's like, oh, well, this victim spit on the other person, and they're like, well, the other person was punching her in the face repeatedly and spit flew out of her mouth. And like, no, I don't know. The person spit on him and it's against the law. You see these things and you're just like, how can this happen? That's not a real example. I'm just giving.
But you're absolutely right though. Things of that nature, even if you're just pulling that example out of your ass, there 100% are instances that are exactly that ridiculous.
It's
that are taking place because of the way that laws as they are written are being bent and maneuvered, and it's a square peg trying to fit into a round hole, but they find a way to get it jammed over semantics.
And you do see, I try to be real understanding about things like this, right? Because you see it happen like in hospitals where people get kind of like battle scarred to the point that they don't react. Maybe they have some inappropriate humor because they're just like, they see this horrible stuff day in and day out. In the courts, it's not much different. They see these horrible things day in and day out, and they just kind of get this thing where like it's almost like the people become not people to them. I think in most careers, that's when it's time to say, I'm going to go do something else. Because when you go in there as justice minded, you're really affecting people's lives, like on a daily basis. It's what inappropriate humor behind the scenes is one thing. So even if I said, like, if I could say that this was horrible, what Proctor said about Karen and her things or whatever else, it's not 100% a sign that he did anything corrupt in that moment, other than saying he was searching the phone for nudes. That's a little bit over the pale, but he called her some names, and you can say like, well, yeah, but he thinks she's a criminal. And I know a lot of cops, and they probably don't speak too nicely about people they think are criminals. I'm not going to, someone doesn't need to be canceled forever for using coarse language. Right.
Sure.
But at the end of the day, when you start actually having an impact on people's lives because of some petty bullshit, like I forwarded an email to the wrong person,
100%.
And frankly, she didn't have to argue much, right? Because you're going to win that case she's going to win that case all day long. Eventually, the court's going to drop it, but they're going to make her go see family services. She's going to probably have to take a class about communication with your co-parent and go through all of these things. And that is what happened. They dropped it. It's completely off her record. It's not there. She had to go to court like 7 times.
Oh my
She had to
goodness.
stop her life and go to court 7 times. She had to take a class. She had to do all of these things, all at her own expense.
Right.
Over something that should have been the very first time that the guy went in and complained about it. Somebody should have looked at it and said, yeah, there's not enough here to charge anybody. And that should have been over.
Especially if she didn't add any commentary to the
just a
forwarding.
Just a straightforward with no commentary.
Nothing. Oh my goodness. Yep. Yeah, that should never have been picked up. I mean, that should have just been allowed to sink.
But you see this stuff, the court is like kind of they're woefully inefficient, and they're tied to their processes, and they're not in a hurry. And I can see all of the good arguments on why, yes, they shouldn't be reckless. Yes, they shouldn't be. They should really get to the bottom of a situation. They should have all the facts in front of you. But some of these things, but over and over again, you see these things that are so ludicrous that you just say, when you walk in there, and you should have like a first hearing where people need to argue out their case a little bit better, and you have a chance to defend yourself a little bit better, because so many things should be dropped right at the gate. You know,
and if that happens, then this woman, just to kind of keep running with your example, this woman would only have to miss 1 day of work. She would only have to retain an attorney and maybe pay him for a tiny bit of prep and show up 1 day. Instead, like, look at what Karen Reed is going through. I mean, even after she's acquitted, if she's acquitted, afterwards, she's out so much money, which hopefully she sues back into her own pocket. I'd like to see that happen. She's gone all these years without her vehicle. I mean, she has been raked over the coals. Her reputation is likely shot. I mean, it's going to do a number on her career. Things that she's worked very, very hard to have. So, when just these court processes, yes, even though a lot of the time, ultimately, these cases are won. If this woman you're talking about wins her case, sure, she wins, but she just spent all this time, all this money getting raked over the coals. Her job's probably looking at her, with a lens of, oh, this lady's got so much drama in family court that they're thinking less of her. I mean, it's crazy what people have to go through just to defend themselves.
Yeah, there's all this stigma that's associated with it. And I will say that this example is something that occurred in the past, and she's fine, and she got through it, and the charges were dismissed eventually. And she was okay work-wise and all these things. But every example that you gave there is real world things that happen to people. They end up in these situations, and there's nothing that they can do. And anything that can be settled outside of court, man, because the system is not designed to help people. It's designed to move slowly. It's designed to perpetuate its whole system. And Boston Brandy's
like
right. Yeah.
That it's almost like that that technique where you hold someone in a room for a really long time and get them sweating before you actually walk in and ask them tough questions. Or it's almost like you're putting them in purgatory, just, so that they're living with their bunghole clenched for so long that they go ahead and take a plea deal. They're out of money, they're out of time. It almost seems like it's a tactic from the prosecution.
Well, you've hit on a dirty little secret, which is they definitely, like, judges want every case to settle. Like, they don't want cases to go to trial. They don't want it. So they do have this perverse incentive to drag things on to avoid the cost of a trial, right? So that happens in real life. And the other side of this that we're not looking at. So I gave an example of this woman who was in a situation, and there was 2 parties, adverse parties. There are situations where people are just victims that they also have to go to court 9 times. And they were already victimized in the initial incident. And then all of a sudden, they now have to go back to court 9 times. They have to take a day off of work. Sometimes in situations like I told you about with the restraining order, the a case in mass with the wiretapping involved in it, they have
Yes.
to hire attorneys. I can tell you right now that on Tuesday, when this woman who Lindsay Gaetani threatened goes to court for the return of her HPO, she's going to have an attorney. Because at the end of the day, you can so quickly go from being a victim to being a suspect or whatever else. We got into this whole long discussion as a basis of why I started my YouTube channel early. And it was because I wanted to create a video for her demonstrating that she indeed did not wiretap, because she needed to play that video for the police because they didn't know and they were thinking about charging her with wiretapping. And so
Exactly.
I made that video so she could show it to them and they could say, oh, this makes sense. You actually didn't wiretap anybody. And they opted not to charge her. But I made the video and released my channel early specifically so that she would be able to take that video to the police and show it to them.
Right. This is how the system works now. it warns you that you're being recorded. Nikki says it's almost like they make it difficult and impossible to actually go to trial, and that's why so many of them plea out for something they didn't do and have a record. Absolutely.
It's true. I mean, look at the Karen Reed case. They upped the charges in the beginning to create a perverse incentive for her to make a deal and plea down. Even you look at the way that they did the lesser includeds and all of these things. Like, I hate that they can do this. Like, you should dance with the girl that brought you. If you think you can prove this charge, that's great. Now, defense attorneys will say, yeah, but maybe if our client is guilty, like maybe if, juries are unpredictable, like maybe we want that lesser option. So I'm not going to go as far as saying it should be outlawed, but it really is, what does this have to do with justice? This just has to do with who can get a win.
100%. And I've mentioned that exact issue on, I have a little bit of a TikTok channel as well. That's kind of where I branched over from, but I've said until I'm blue in the face that if you are trying to prove murder or something, then adding manslaughter is almost like you're trying to throw the kitchen sink at the wall to see what sticks. In a lot of cases, like Karen, for example, if it's manslaughter or if it's murder, both those theories completely counteract one another. They're opposite. So what are you even going to argue in court?
Well, and let's look at juries. So from a prosecution standpoint, you know what juries hate? Juries hate that they actually have to make a decision. They do, because you're on a jury and they'll split the baby, right?
Exactly.
Because they're like, well, what if she really did it? There's always this thing in your mind. What if she really did it? And instead of, I don't care how many times you give jury instructions and how many times you do this, at the end of the day, those people have to live with their conscience and say, what if she really did it and we let her go free? Well, let's just take the lesser. Let's take the lesser option because just in case. And that happens all the time.
It's almost like a compromise that they're trying to make for just so everybody wins, everybody's happy, everybody goes home, and they can sleep at night peacefully. I don't know if you. Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, you go.
I was just going to ask if you had seen any of the Ashley Benefield trial.
I haven't seen any of it.
So that's a case in which a woman who was charged with second degree was also charged with manslaughter. And then the elements of the manslaughter, so it was a self-defense case, right? It was an abusive ex. She had successfully gotten a restraining order on him in a different state. He violated it once or twice, and so she ended up moving to Florida, moving in with her mother to get some distance between the two of them. He followed her to Florida, where she then tried to refile for the restraining order, and Florida wouldn't grant it. So he showed up at the residence one day. They were alone together. Things got bad. He, supposedly initiated some physical stuff, and she ended up popping him. So anyway, the elements of the manslaughter charge were, did the defendant have a weapon? Well, yeah, nobody's arguing that. Element 2, did the defendant fire a weapon? Yes, she did. It's self-defense. And element 3 was, did the firing of that weapon result in the death of the victim? Well, yeah, because of that, well, partially because of that, she ended up, you know, getting convicted for that lesser charge, even though they were trying to prove second degree. So it was just
Right.
a very interesting case that seemed like it fit what we were talking about.
But it's really weird, right? Because in this country, we're supposed to be so concerned with the rights of the defendants. Better 10 guilty men go free than one innocent man,
Then one in,
right? So
exactly.
you end up with this scenario, but that's not how it works in real life. It's
No,
not how it works in real life. In real life, it is the system is stacked against the defendant, and they really should. The bottom line is, at the end of the day, I see this with some of Judge Bev's rulings in the Karen Reed case. We have this scenario where, like, she's making decisions and saying, well, that would be prejudicial to the Commonwealth if we allowed it to be told that the ARCA people were hired by the FBI, right? It'd be prejudicial to the Commonwealth. But who has more rights, the people or the people on trial, or just the prosecutor? Because to me,
exactly.
it's like, what should be helpful to the jury? It's actually the jury should know that there's a federal law enforcement agency that has a different view of this case than the prosecution is presenting. Like, the jury
I
should know that.
I agree. That would have, I think, completely changed how the jury came back on that trial.
I, I I really hope the defense revisits it, because the statements from the jury that they thought that ARCA was hired by the insurance company, by her car insurance company, should really sway that decision as to what's admissible or not. Now that we know what went down in that scenario, we really should say, hey, the jury has a right to know this, and allowing them to be misled into believing, even if they misled themselves into believing that this was an insurance company situation. Nobody likes insurance companies. Of course they're
No,
gonna
no.
discount their testimony,
Yeah, everything an insurance company says you're going to take with a grain of salt, a wedge of lime, and a shot of tequila.
The
That's
other
for
side of
sure.
that is, I want an insurance company to do things like build cannons to shoot glasses at cars. Like, I would actually get a policy from that. Yes, do that, you know.
Agreed. Man, a lot of Bev's rulings, you're right. It seems like she's almost trying to make it an even playing field,
Yep.
when that's not how the justice system was designed. The justice system was designed to put the burden on the state
Yes.
for
Amen.
charges. So, that's why you have that criteria of beyond a reasonable doubt, or in the case of Massachusetts, beyond a reasonable doubt to a moral certainty in order
Right.
to convict.
Yep.
Sherry says that, and this just goes to how you cannot just trust that everybody in the jury has an average or higher IQ. The jurors had pondered whether Turtleboy had hired Arca. I mean, my thinking is there's absolutely not a snowball's chance in hell that Bev would have allowed the Arca witnesses if they had been retained by Turtleboy, but that's just me.
The thing is that there actually should have been. It's really interesting, because there should have been no mention of Turtleboy during the trial at all.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there should have been no removing him from the gallery or none of this. The jury should not have even known the words Turtleboy, because the
Yeah.
bottom line is, um, he has not been tried or convicted of any witness intimidation. He's not allowed to interact with the witnesses from the media box anyway. Like, the witnesses should have just been prepped. Ignore him. He's over there. Don't even look at him. Don't worry about it. Come and give your testimony. He's not going to harass you in this courtroom while you're here, so you're completely safe. But by allowing Turtleboy to be made an issue in the trial, that's probably grounds for an appeal for Karen Reed to begin with.
I agree.
And especially because Karen Reed has also not been charged with witness intimidation or conspiring to witness intimidate with Turtleboy, despite how bad the trolls want that to be the case.
Mhm.
So she shouldn't be prejudiced by the mention of him.
No,
The whole thing is ridiculous.
it is. So speaking of Bev rulings and speaking of the First Amendment, um, I'm really interested in seeing how Bev plans to justify her decision to take Gretchen Voss's personal notes from her interviews with Karen Reed. ruling that, with the Commonwealth on that. And I understand that currently there's no shield law, which I believe there should be for journalists. But needing personal notes, that's not a direct verbatim of what the person you're interviewing said. That's you trying to navigate your own thoughts.
Yeah, and Gretchen Voss is not an expert witness, right? So her opinions are irrelevant. So
Exactly.
what Gretchen, if it were a transcription from a transcription service of a recording of Karen Reed's actual words, that's one thing. But Gretchen Voss's notes are admissible. Bev may rule that they can be discovered, but I have a hard time figuring out how they're going to try and admit any of them into a trial as anything other than hearsay or her opinion, because there's no fact-based things involved in what Gretchen Voss wrote down.
Exactly.
They don't let people refer to their own notes when testifying if they're not an expert witness and it's not specifically asked. So it's a really weird scenario that she's opened the door for something to be, this is a court authorized fishing expedition. And I've always wondered in this case whether it involves the fact that Gretchen Voss has gone to the prosecution and said, I have these things, but I have to make a show of opposing it. You're going to have to subpoena me because I need to retain my credibility as a journalist. That's purely speculation on my part. I don't have any evidence of that being the case, but it doesn't surprise me with Gretchen Voss out there doing mushrooms with Kate Peter and all these other things. And you see the Food Stamp 5 show up to protest, but they stop 2 blocks from the protest and give Gretchen Voss this little interview prior to them reaching all of the other media and the thing, because they had some little exclusive deal with her. You see all of this. Gretchen Voss, we know she's writing a book. We know she's involved in trying to produce a documentary and some of these other things. So I do believe that to me, it's like the fix is in. Like Gretchen Voss thinks she has something that's going to be useful to them, and she just made them, subpoena her to get it, because they worked awfully hard to get that in for some reason, and they're not going to do that if they don't know what it's there.
That's true. That's absolutely true. Now, when it comes to that particular set of laws surrounding journalism, which is essentially nothing, that just makes me worry for anybody in Massachusetts or, any other state that does not have journalism shield laws. It makes me worry for anybody who has ever blown the whistle on an organization, anybody who has wanted to come to a journalist privately and keep themselves anonymous, because in Massachusetts, you can be compelled by a court, just as Gretchen Voss has been, and just as probably other media outlets are going to be, to share information about who your sources are and whatever they talked about with the court, or else the journalist could go to jail.
It's true. And this is 2024, right? Journalists shouldn't have to decide between doing their job and going to jail. Like it really shouldn't be a thing. I thank God every day that I live in Connecticut and that we do have a journalist shield law. You know what I mean? So that I can write my stories from here, or I can make videos from here, and I can do these things without feeling like I'm under the threat of the government being able to walk in. And the media is supposed to be the fourth estate, right? The media is supposed to be the stopgap to help prevent tyranny in government, because you have this amazing First Amendment that we have the ability to do these things, but it's basically wiped off the table if they can use these laws to coerce journalists into giving up their things. Because what happens is you won't have whistleblowers, you won't have sources come out and do things, and a lot of good has come from ending government abuses from whistleblowers coming forward and talking to a journalist. We look at Richard Nixon. I mean, obviously Watergate is the biggest example of that.
Yes.
You have these scenarios where maybe the people that were talking to the reporters would have kept their mouths shut if they were going to be, if they were afraid the reporters were going to have to be compelled to testify against them or identify who they were or go through these things. And that's the end result. That's the slippery slope of not having a shield law. It just allows the government corruption to happen. There's less challenge to it, so it happens in a much more pervasive way.
That, as well as if you're a journalist and you're given a court order to turn over information that you had just promised somebody was going to be kept private, if you comply with that, what does that do to your reputation as a journalist moving forward?
Well, that's right,
Your career's ruined.
and that's kind of my whole point. So not only your career, but you're not going to get those stories out. So you have the combination of this where people aren't going to, the next set of people aren't going to come forward.
Right. Right.
And
Yeah, you won't
and
have sources anymore.
and I say, like, I say to myself, if I were in this scenario and I were in Massachusetts, this happened, I would go to jail, right? But it's real easy for me to say that while I'm sitting in my chair in Connecticut on a YouTube show. Like, there are other concerns. Those people have families, they have wives or husbands, and they have kids, and they have things like that. That may not be an option for everybody, and you
Yeah.
shouldn't not be able to. It shouldn't be, well, you can only be a journalist if you're willing to forego all of your freedoms and sit in a jail cell. Like, it's a noble thing, and all of us would hope that we would do it.
Yeah.
I'd probably do it, but I mean, my kids are grown. You know what I mean? My kids are my million kids. I'm known. I never revealed the exact number, but I've got kids everywhere, and despite people saying that I have young children, I don't. But like, I'm not worried. I'm not worried as much about me because I would be able to make it work, I think, for long enough for someone to notice and say, "Hey, this is wrong. Stop it."
Right, exactly. And I think a lot of journalists probably feel, hypothetically, if that were to happen, that they'd be okay, or else they probably wouldn't have gone into journalism in the first place. But I guess you never really know until you're facing that situation in real life.
It's
Um,
true. We have a real crisis now too, and I think it's kind of the advent of this independent journalism, because what's happening is um, local media is gone, right?
mhm,
So every town used to have a newspaper, and every one of those would write about these local things. And some towns still do, and they just cover kind of like the sports, the high school sports, or this or that. But a
mhm.
lot, by and large, those are disappearing all over
Yeah,
the place. And news has been in even the larger things, like the Hartford Courant's a good example. It's a fairly large, one of the top 20 newspapers, I think, in the country, and their local bureaus have been decimated. They don't have anybody. And so what happens is they print, that come down through the Tribune organization, they print these press releases that are there. And you have the police, the government puts out press releases that they print because they don't have to send a reporter, right? They just get mailed this thing, and that's a news story for them. So they get to print that and fill up the newspaper and fill up their TV airwaves, and they do all of this. But local news, by and large, is almost dead. And
it is.
it's been replaced by people like us, right? So I feel a responsibility to get stories right. I feel a responsibility to do this more and more as you see it in geographical areas. So like
Mhm.
now there's like a lot of places have like a local blog or a local Facebook group or all of these things that happen where a lot of the news comes from. And you see it in genres like true crime or things like that are topical. And
Sure.
we've become the local news, so it's important. It's no longer all of these people that are going to journalism school and they're going to J school and they're coming out here and they're doing these things. I actually went out and joined the Society of Professional Journalists, and I bought their journalistic code of ethics so that I could look through it, and I do things. I actually I take what I'm doing seriously. I do plan to try and do this for a career, and I want to spend the time to get it right. And more you see, like, the corporate journalists and the things like that, they have kind of this disdain for us, right? We're the riffraff,
Yes.
and they've got this thing. So the Gretchen Vosses of the world and these other people, of course, they hate people like Aiden Carney, and they hate the scenario. Not all of them. Some of them are good about it, but
But they're gonna call him a blogger and not a real
right.
journalist.
I told the first, when that was really big and people kept saying, "You're not a journalist, you're a blogger." I said, "You know what? You should own it. You should say,
Yeah.
you're damn right I'm a blogger, which means I'm not beholden to any of these corporate interests who aren't going to let me report on controversial things that are really important for you to hear. Like, don't tell me that a blogger is not a journalist, because they are, you
Agreed. I
know."
mean, they're gathering information, they're collecting data, they're speaking to people, or, they're one way or another, they are digging and then disseminating that information to the public. things that
It-
would be of public interest.
So what we're really just talking about is the medium in which they're reporting on, and the fact that it is a little bit like the Wild West, right? We don't have a whole legal department looking over our shoulder, and maybe sometimes we might even say things that get us in trouble, or we do all of these things. But you know what? It's real and it's raw, and it is something that you're not getting out in the marketplace. On some days on Twitter, I have higher ratings than CNN. I mean, it's not a joke.
Yeah.
Like on some days on Twitter, I have more people that read my tweets that had watched CNN that day. So don't tell me that my stories aren't real or that people aren't, it really is, media is changing, and it's actually changing in an exciting way. And there are some risks, and there are some things that don't come out as right. And there are some people, if we look at Grant Smith Ellis, the dude just lies every day. He just tells from the beginning of the day till the end. Almost every single word that comes out of his mouth is a lie, and he calls himself a journalist, and there's no one to call him out. And he does these things, but you know what? That's also what we're here for. Like, let the marketplace of ideas win, and the remedy for speech you don't disagree with is more speech. And let's get out there, and the people get to decide, right? They get to decide who they want to watch and who they give credibility to and who they want to believe. And go ahead.
One thing that, I will really never forgive is, there are plenty of ways other than just lying to me to take away my ability to make an informed decision. You know what I mean? So if you're taking away the public's access to information based on that you think they're not telling the truth about something, which, who are you to say they're not telling the truth until the actual data comes out? But when you're taking away someone's ability to make a decision, I mean, that's definitely not a good thing. But when you pull someone from the internet, or if you pull something that somebody wrote from public access, you're taking away the public's choice to listen to who they want to, or to read who they want to.
It's true. And isn't that what separates America from some of these other countries, from China or from Russia or whatever else? We don't have the state-run Politburo here that puts out this information that, this is, North Korea, whatever Kim Jong-un says is what you're going to hear, we have the ability in this country. We have a free press for a reason, but it's not really free. But when all of the people are being eliminated from being able to say what they want. So
absolutely. Before I let you go, I wanted to show you something that I kind of found over the past week. I found a bill on the House floor that might just bring federal protection to journalists. I'm going to go ahead and pull it up now and put it on the stage. It's, it was drafted this year. There was another bill that didn't pass. And this looks pretty straightforward. Y'all bear with me. I'm still trying to figure out how to do this whole thing called YouTube. I am an amateur.
You're doing good.
Okay, let me scroll to the top here. Can you guys see this okay? Are you able to see it, Jason?
I can see it, yep.
Okay, so part of what's in this bill, the first thing it does is define what a journalist is, which is, like we brought up before, a person who regularly gathers, prepares, collects, photographs, records, writes, edits, reports, investigates, or publishes any news or information that concerns local, national, or international events. So by that rationale, you are a journalist. Aiden Carney, aka Turtleboy, is a journalist. So the whole, are you backed by a company, or did you graduate with a certain degree? That has nothing to do with it. But what it would do is make it to where, yes, no journalist can be compelled. And I'll email this to you, Jason, or I'll message you the link so that you can see the verbiage. But it would make it to where no journalist can be compelled in a court of law to turn over source information or any data that is so-called off the record, unless just a couple little exceptions. Like if there's an issue of imminent violence, let me go down to the. Okay. So the only ways that someone could be forced, the only reasons for such would be basically to prevent some kind of violence or terrorism, or if someone is saying is maybe suing you for defamation or slander and they need it for discovery. But aside from that, it pretty much gives a blanket protection federally over journalists. And as much as I love what we're starting to see with Representative Nick Bodega in Massachusetts, to me, it seems like it would be great to kind of see a blanket protection federally.
I agree. I guess that we'd have to figure out how that applies jurisdictionally, right? So do the state courts have to recognize that, unless it's an amendment, right, where we see like with the First Amendment, they could put something in the U.S. code, but the states could then argue about the supremacy clause and all kinds of other things. So we'd have to see. We'd have to see if it becomes a states' rights issue or whatever else. And the thing is I just can't see why anybody would be in opposition to it. It really is. I can see why some of the people in this case who are hypocritical and, TBDS is a thing, right? This Turtleboy derangement syndrome.
Yes,
there are people who are willing to sacrifice all of their principles as long as they can get Aiden Carney. Like they don't care about the consequences or what it means to every other journalist or what it means. And they may not like me either. I'm all right with that too. But think of the environment that you're creating where the government is in full control over what you see or hear or do. And if you say something that the government doesn't like, that they can just put you in jail. Like that to me is the most ridiculous thing ever. So I still think I would love to see that pass. And I would love to see that because I also want to report on things in federal court and things that are related to national issues and do different things. But I still think we need to push the ball forward in states like Massachusetts and others that don't have a shield law, and states that have that don't have a good law regarding you recording in terms of wiretapping and one party or two party consent, and states that don't have. There's a few different things that need to be done. So one of them is the shield law. One of them is the witness intimidation statute, and the other one is this right to record and the situation with two-party recording. Like if those three things got done in a place like Massachusetts, it would make it a state where freedom reigns. And I think we need to do that everywhere.
100%. 100%. And you're right. Every state does need its own independent protection. So this is a map that I found by the Reporters Committee. And it just shows what states actually have absolute protection for journalists, sources, etc. So everyone that you see that is in that bright orange, kind of that darkest color, that those states have a full journalistic privilege. The ones that are the next darkest, they have a lot of qualifiable exceptions on sources and things like that. The light colors, Massachusetts. I don't know if you can see my cursor, but Massachusetts is one of the ones that has a very light color. So according to this map, it has no shield law, but courts do recognize a privilege for sources that is qualified or contains certain exceptions.
Just so we can stop there for a minute, I will tell you that we do see that it is true in Massachusetts, there is some common law reporter's privilege, right? In certain cases, it's been looked at and applied that people can reach back in and try and claw some of those out. And we're seeing that in Aiden Carney's cases now, where they're talking about, Tim Bradel is going in and he's talking about these common law privileges in the state. These guys have their hands tied, but they are still fighting and they are still finding ways to go and apply that. But I agree. I think that we should want every state to be that dark gold,
Yes.
And luckily only one state has no shield law, and and
Yeah.
barely anybody lives there. So we're probably
Come
all
on,
right.
Wyoming. I know, but they need to catch up with the rest of us. Um, is there anything, Jason, that you wanted to bring up before I let you go so we can all watch Aiden?
No,
Aiden's stream is about to come on.
I think that and I may even hop on another stream after this too, but
Oh,
I think that I think that for me, I couldn't have a conversation about the First Amendment and not talk about the buffer zone
mhm,
outside the court in the Carney trials. So because that to me was, we looked at that situation. Mark Randazza, who I am privileged to have known for many more years than this case has been going on, was the attorney on that. And we look at cases like that buffer zone. I can see that Judge Bev would have the standing to order things on court property, but
mhm.
she actually took people that own private property that were in the vicinity of the court that were within this zone, and somehow exerted some standing over them to say what they could or couldn't do on their private property during the proceeding of, during the trial. And I think that was um such an overreach. She didn't, even to implement the buffer zone, she did not document findings that are required for her to do so. There's all kinds of things, and we're in a situation where we have an amazing, probably one of the best First Amendment attorneys in the country, and Mark Randazza,
Uh-huh.
um, who was able to argue, got denied, not a surprise in Massachusetts, was able to
Sure.
go to the First Circuit, get denied there, and then in almost any other situation, it would be a great place for him to apply for cert to go to the Supreme Court, except for when you go to get an injunction. So we're talking about something that needs to happen during the pendency
Yeah.
of the trial. When you
Yeah.
go to get an injunction from the First Circuit Court of Appeals, the federal appeals court, they send it to a single justice of the Supreme Court of the United States. And in Massachusetts, the person covering the first district is Ketanji Brown, and she's just not an advocate for the First Amendment, not a fan of the First Amendment. And it literally is like, you have this case that has merit. You have something here that should have gone in, that at least should have gotten sent back to the judge to say, no, you can't do this on this private property, and you have to make these specific findings. And the case is basically dead because you're never going to get there in time for it to apply to the case that you're on.
Oh my goodness.
And
I
so
Do you even love America if you're not a fan of, of the First Amendment?
I guess the First Amendment protects your right to not love America, right? So, like, so in that regard, I'm okay with it. But
Sure.
you just have to say, like, man, if you're a justice on the Supreme Court of the United States, like, you and you're not in favor of like the First Amendment, like, that's a problem.
That that is. That is. Man. Man, oh man. Jason, can you please share with the chat since you're here. So everybody, Jason has started his own YouTube channel. He has one video out that came out last week. He is in the process of uploading a second. Can you tell everybody, Jason, the name of your channel so that people can find you, subscribe to you, and give your
Yeah,
video a like?
yes, it's at On Your Case, ONYOURCASE. So youtube.com/ at On Your Case.
Okay, I'm putting that in the chat for everybody as well. And guys, I hope everybody here got to know Jason just a little bit better. If you don't like him, then you should perhaps rethink your career as an internet troll, because I think just
I
about
really,
everybody else does.
I keep them alive. Like those internet trolls, I give them oxygen every single day. Like I feel like they should appreciate me a little bit more, in the sense that they would really have nothing to talk about if they didn't talk about me every single day.
That's pretty true. That's pretty true, it seems. Well, I am so glad that that you took the time to come hang out with us here in the Savage Patch today. I could probably go on with that First Amendment conversation forever. So if you ever want to come back, just say the word. You have an open invitation. You are welcome back on this channel anytime. And it seems that everybody in the chat feels the same. So,
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And when I'm doing some video uploads first, but when I start doing some live streaming, I definitely want to have you on my channel as well, and I'd love to come back.
Oh, shucks. He wants to see me again, guys. Did y'all hear that?
That's true. Are you coming to DJ's thing up here in Boston? Oh, so that's great. So I'll see you in person then anyway.
Yep, I'll see you here in just a couple weeks then. All righty.
Very exciting.
Well, Jason, I'm going to go ahead and let you go. Guys, this is a baby channel. It has just begun channeling. If you would like to support it right now, since it's such a baby, there's no super chats or super stickers or anything, but you can support the channel by giving to the Venmo. This channel has bills. Venmo is Brit Happens. That's with 2 T's. And then the Cash App is Brit Happens Channel. So if you guys would like to help support this channel, please feel free to do it through those avenues. Please make sure on your way out and on your way to Turtleboy's stream that you give this video a like and that you subscribe and maybe share with a friend who you think would appreciate this material as well. Please don't forget to follow Jason, and we hope that you have a wonderful rest of your night, and I appreciate you helping me in my mission to make common sense common again. So
I love it.
Y'all take care. Have a wonderful rest of your night. Good night, Jason.
Good night.